Thank you so much, Jen. On behalf of everyone at US Bank, it is just such an honor to be here with all of you today. I think 2020 has just been a whirlwind for all of us. At US Bank, we changed everything about our giving in response to the changing world around us. When COVID-19 hit, we pivoted our $30 million foundation budget to provide pandemic relief for nonprofits who desperately needed it. We doubled our employee matching gifts so our employees could give back. We created a site for virtual volunteerism. We thought we had changed everything. And then in our hometown market of Minneapolis, George Floyd was killed. And as a result of that, we made a series of announcements, including $116 million that we will give annually to help close racial wealth gaps. $100 million of that is focused on providing access to capital for Black-owned businesses and suppliers. And $16 million is for grants to organizations that are addressing economic and racial inequities. As a result of listening to the community, which we always try to do before we take action, we gave all of those grants to organizations that are led by people of color, prioritizing Black-led organizations. It all starts with listening, learning, and trusting our community partners, and ends with a focus on social justice and equity. And we are so lucky to have so many partners in the community who are doing the hard work of changing systems to drive more equitable outcomes, including our fantastic partners at Girls with Impact. Now, we support Girls with Impact to ensure that all girls are ready for sustainable careers and to help change the world. And we're honored to support the report findings that we are going to share today about what's on the mind of Gen Z. And I found this report absolutely fascinating. Some of the concerns were familiar, and I nodded my head. Some, like a growing focus on mental health, seem really reasonable, but growing at alarming rates. And importantly, what this group is telling us is that social justice, fighting racism, and driving innovation are significant priorities for Gen Z. And interestingly, those are some of the same priorities that we're focused on at US Bank. So that's why I'm so pleased to be a part of this discussion. Now, before Jen digs into the findings from the report, we are so excited to have a Girls with Impact graduate, 16-year-old Neha Shukla, with us. Earlier this year, Neha was inspired by her grandparents. She did not want them to contract COVID-19, so she combined her coding skills and her love of STEM to produce 6 feet apart, which is a wearable sensor device. So Neha, I would love to ask you, and by the way, none of you can recruit Neha. She's coming to work at US Bank after she graduates from Harvard. That's her plan. She already told me. So Neha, that aside, tell me a little bit more about this device that you created.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So this is 6 feet apart. It's a wearable social distancing device, and it's essentially a microprocessor-based device embedded in a hat. And inside there's all the circuitry and the ultrasonic sensor. And essentially it works by sending out ultrasonic waves and sensing the environment around it from a program that I created myself. So I was really inspired to create this device really early on in the pandemic when I saw the exponential growth of COVID-19. I saw how it was really hitting our communities. And whenever I was actually a part of the Girls with Impact Academy, it taught me to actually channelize that passion for STEM and looking at that need for a device like this, because there's currently nothing on the market like 6 feet apart. So it really helped me channelize that passion into something that actually is a tangible product that can actually make a difference. And that was the biggest thing for me that I wanted to do during the pandemic. I know a lot of us feel like we're helpless and we want to do something, but we really can't. And I think Girls with Impact really helped me be the change that I want to see in the world. So I was really excited by the idea of making 6 feet apart.
Wow, channeling Mahatma Gandhi and be the change, fantastic. And Neha, I have to tell you, and this never happens to me, I'm pretty speechless over what you just shared. Tell us a little bit about how Girls with Impact supported you creating what you did.
Absolutely. So in Girls with Impact, I was simultaneously building out my scientific innovation and also thinking about the business aspect of it. So thinking about the viability of the product, thinking about what would my customers actually want, because we can't just make a device that works, but nobody can use it because doesn't have a good user interface, or it is way too expensive. You know, you can't have a social distancing device that's like $100,000, right? So it really helped me think about those things that actually help the feasibility in the market. And then the other side of it is also the mentorship. So we had a coach that we would talk to every week, and then we can also contact them throughout the week. And also Jen has been my mentor throughout this whole process. So it's been really great seeing that you can get feedback from industry experts. You can kind of learn throughout the process. And there is it's not like a shame of asking feedback. It's so open and so transparent. Everybody's just trying to help you grow. So it was a really great environment for me.
That is absolutely incredible and inspiring. And Neha, I'm going to ask you one final question. Then I know you're going to participate in the rest of the dialogue, and we'd love you to, because as I told you earlier, you are clearly the star of the show. Companies are focused clearly on talent like you. So if you were talking to a CEO or an HR leader who was trying to kind of acquire you as talent, what would you say? What do we need to do in corporate America to attract talent like you?
That's a great question. So I think part of it is kind of understanding the need of the hour. And in the report, I've really talked about the different things that Gen Z is concerned about. One of the things is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think a lot of Gen Z wants to know that their voice is being heard in the workplace and in school and all those things. So making sure that they have representation, and also it actually means something. Like they have a voice at the table and they can actually influence decisions, and they're a part of the decision-making process. And the other part of it is really knowing that you're making an impact. People don't really go to work partially it is for the money, but mainly they want to know that throughout their life, they did something to impact their community, to make a difference in society. So really creating an impact-driven mission for the company and making sure that each person is actually influencing their environment and doing something positive with their work.
Wow, music to my ears. Thank you so much, Neha. And I hope you're following the chat, because there are a lot of fantastic positive affirmations for you. With that, I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Well, that first finding that we're going to get to just hits exactly on what Neha did. So let me give everybody just a little bit of an overview. This is our third annual report, taking a look inside the minds of Gen Z. But what we wanted to do this year was really kind of peel back in light of COVID and see what were the differences between this year and last year. So that's what we're going to walk through over the next 20 minutes or so. You can see a very diverse population of all ethnicities, also a really nice mix of men, women, and non-binary individuals. So let's get into the first finding here. We asked them, how do you want to make an impact? And here, we know how purpose-driven Gen Z is. You heard Neha. This came out loud and clear. And we saw kind of an important shift compared to last year. So last year, the number one way that Gen Z wanted to make a difference was to make a difference to a cause they care about. You can see that right here, 65%. This year, the pink bar, number one is personally creating something innovative, which is exactly what Neha did. And we see that coming through so much with young people. We also saw that about 1/3 of Gen Zers surprisingly hope to have children who are going to change the world. And you can also see that not many of them expect to become a politician in terms of changing the world. But still, you can see how the big issues of the last year, COVID, Black Lives Matters, you're going to see the threads of that as we go through the report. This focus is really seen too when we take a look at what are their top 5 concerns we ask. So a little similar to last year, their top concerns are success and getting a job. Ranking third is mental health that you see right here. I think the important point about mental health is that we actually saw a 14% increase, up to 48% compared to last year. So that is really a great, I think, indicator of the struggle, and we're hearing so much about that, of course. The other surprises that we saw is worries about getting good grades. So that's this one here. It spiked 20% over last year. We also saw concerns about racism. That's a big issue that came out loud and clear, more than double that you can see here. And then on a positive note, we see that the family stress actually dropped. And, you know, perhaps this is because folks can stay home. They're feeling like they can operate a little more efficiently. I know that it's been a plus in some ways for my family. So then we asked Gen Z, well, what's your single biggest concern of those fives? And getting a job and being successful still ranks number one. You can see that getting a job is less of an issue compared to 2019. I think, again, the big thing is that concerns about racism spiked up. Also see a little bit of increase on the grades and the mental health, again, that we talked about. By the way, I want to mention that mental health is a bigger issue for women and non-binary than it is for men. Men much more focused on getting a job and being successful. Maybe not so much of a surprise for some of you. When we looked at this from a gender lens, again, I just kind of commented on that, but you can see being a successful here, much more important for men, getting a job, being successful, whereas mental health, women surpass men, and it's mental health certainly a huge issue for our non-binary population, as are those issues around racism. So what are the big takeaways? I'm just going to touch on a couple of these, but clearly focusing on mental health. One of the things that we're seeing companies starting to do is adopt a mental health app. Where not just the employee, but the entire family can access help on demand. The other thing that we do at Girls with Impact, we've always been operating virtually, is the importance of creating that culture of real teamwork so that people know that other team members can come in and alleviate stress if they're having those moments. I want to now turn to Gen Z and looking into the future. What is Gen Z thinking about? How are they feeling about their future? And here to take us through those findings is Ben Tao. Ben runs corporate marketing for ForcePoint, which is a global cybersecurity firm. We're really grateful to have you here, Ben.
Thank you, Jen. On behalf of ForcePoint, I'm very pleased to be here. Our vision is to stop the bad and free the good, and that vision has never been truer and more important, given the need for cybersecurity. And to that vision, we're super pleased to be able to support Girls with Impact. So let's take a look at the next set of results, which is how the Gen Zers view their future. So we asked respondents, how likely are you to be or do the following? So a couple interesting trends emerged. In 2020, 3/4 of Gen Zers expect to be happy in the workplace, which is good. That's certainly a positive statement. That's actually up 10% compared to 2019. But the real story is the greater increase in Gen Zers who want to be an entrepreneur and actually run their own business. 52% this year compared to 45% last year. Interestingly, on the flip side of all the options, they feel least likely to become a leader, with nearly 2/3 of them saying they are unsure or unlikely to become a leader of an organization. So for us in corporate America, that's sort of a warning call on how we want to probably address that concern. And fewer expect to get into their college of their choice. 59% expect to get in their college of their choice this year. That was 63% last year. So certainly an option for all of us to help those Gen Zers desiring to get into their college of choice. Let's double click on some of the results broken down between men, women, non-binary respondents. More than half of the women expect to become entrepreneurs. That's up from 43% last year. So that's a huge shift. We actually saw a staggering 50% drop in the percent of non-binary individuals who expect to become entrepreneurs, although the percentage of the likely to become leaders remains flat around 20%. So what are some of the key takeaways for educators and employees? And I'm just going to focus on a couple. For employees, the one that really resonates with me is the desire to recognize this entrepreneurial spirit in Gen Zers. Many companies have STEM programs. I'm a former engineer, so STEM certainly is true to my heart. I think it's a simple extension to add an E and really expand that to include entrepreneurship. The other one I'd call out is the need to show the potential to create and to show that organizations can create and innovate within organizations and show how a spirit of entrepreneurship can exist everywhere, not just in your own company and not just in a startup. So let's go to the next set of takeaways around encouraging leadership and cultivating entrepreneurship. So, great takeaway around even when people are new hires right out of the chute, I think there's an opportunity to show them the leadership opportunities that exist with the organization and executive opportunities. I think companies need to do a better job of connecting this Gen Z desire to drive innovation, which should go hand in hand with leadership, and that didn't necessarily show up in the survey results. So good opportunity for employees to close that gap. And the other one I'll call out is the need to ensure that women are not just present in key meetings, but are encouraged to participate. Encourage them to speak up, encourage them to actually lead portions of the meeting. So that's a huge, important takeaway that caught my eye as well. Let me turn it back to Jen.
Really great, great input. Thanks so much, Ben. So now turning to their earnings, we asked them, what kind of expectations do you have for your earnings by the age of 40? The interesting thing there is Gen Z and non-binary individuals, their earnings confidence is significantly lower than men. Both 73% of females and 73% of non-binary expect to be earning less than men. We see actually a slight widening of the gender gap because more men, 38% than they did last year, expect to be making over $100,000, whereas more women expect to be making under that $100,000. 1/5, by the way, of Gen Z boys, this is kind of interesting, 1/5 of Gen Z men expect to earn over $200,000 by the age of 40 versus just 12% for women and 16% for non-binary individuals. So get your checkbooks out or hire women, right? And the takeaway there, just a couple things is, to be attractive, Gen Z, they want to know their earning potential. They want to know their pathway. They dig deep in looking at employers, as you heard from Neha briefly earlier, when they're making decisions. So really important to have some very clear answers. And again, that pathway. Next question we're going to turn to is their confidence. So we asked Gen Zers, what would really most drive your confidence? And the bottom line there is that fell into two big categories. Little similar to last year with some important shifts. So the first big category is related to personal image. We see here, right, 48% say if I lose weight, or 38% if I can get rid of that acne, that's going to boost my confidence. The other big area is related to professional development. So launching their own business or public speaking skills improvement. Again, seeing some improvements there over last year. Weight loss still remains the number one way to boost confidence. It's actually up from last year, by the way, where it was 50%. So we see an increase there. In 2019, by the way, Gen Z men said no acne would help gain their confidence. This belief went up more in 2020. The good news, though, I think one of the silver linings here is that more women than men say that launching a business would improve their confidence most. So 35% of women say that versus 24% in 2019. So quite interesting there. I think, again, the big takeaway, as Ben hit on, was really creating those entrepreneurship opportunities for young people, and perhaps bringing in those skills development programs, particularly on the public speaking front, and giving them opportunities to use those, like in those client meetings, for example. Next, we're going to kind of turn to the workplace. So we asked Gen Z a series of questions about what are you looking for in your team, in your employer, what matters most? And the first question we're going to look at here is, what do you look for in your place of work? And we did see a big shift there. So in 2019, having an open workspace ranked number one, followed by a great cafeteria. In 2020, we saw really a complete shift, kind of no surprise, but look at, they like working remotely. And that was an issue that they wanted last year. So this year we see that having your own office and working remote are first and second. One of the things that stood out in last year's report is that they wanted a short distance to work, less than 30 minutes. So you can see that that's kind of playing into things here. We also asked them, what's most important in your workplace? Like when you're going to make a decision and you've got a choice among different factors, what are most important to you? In 2019, last year, it was short commute, as I just mentioned, and having a good mentor. This year, again, we see a little bit of a shift focusing on flexible work schedule and the ability to work remotely. Once again, we see that short commute being super important. Volunteering also, being important there. And I think we've been hearing a lot from employers who are saying, gosh, we're looking for virtual volunteer opportunities. By the way, we do offer those, and we do that with US Bank. We're working with a host of their employees and ForcePoint to engage their employees, even amid the pandemic, working with young women like Neha. So really good example there. We asked GenZ, what about when it comes to your team? What are you looking for? And again, we saw a really interesting flip from 2019 when they said, gosh, I want an older experienced team. And by the way, I want a lot of fun too. This year in 2020, we see that respect. And this is where I think it's so interesting because the issues of the last year really came through in what they're looking for with their teammates. So respect from other team members ranks number one, followed by a great manager, a team with similar values, and diversity on your team important. When we looked at the men versus women split, women more than men said diversity matters most to me and values, and men said a great manager looks like they're looking to get to the top, right? So they're focused on that. But hey, diversity, I think interesting point is that companies are starting to pay a lot more attention to how employees behave in terms of being inclusive. So not to be forgotten there. And I think, I've touched on some of those takeaways, including flexible work schedules, showcasing your mentoring opportunities, even at the high school and college levels. Ensure that opportunities to give back are not just available, but actually encouraged through the workplace. Young people especially are looking for them. And, the feedback that we get from employees is just, it goes a long way in terms of increasing that loyalty back to companies. Last question I wanted to share with you, which was the big COVID question, is what kind of changes are you making because of COVID? And it's so clear, that COVID has had such a big impact. The big one here is screen time. So 59% say they're spending more time on social media and 49% more time on streaming video. My goodness, probably some of your mouths are dropping. Then the other big thing is that they are shifting their living arrangements, staying home with mom and dad. Certainly difficulty with the employment environment. We are seeing some delaying their college plans. In terms of men versus women, we see that more men are delaying college plans over women. Men about double the number of women actually, and more men taking a gap year over women. And actually the same with living their parents, slightly more men, 31% versus 26% of women staying home with their parents. So with that, what I want to do is kind of open it up to a conversation. And if those of you have questions, please, we'll take a look at your chat room. I'm going to start with Reba. And Reba, I'm so curious to know what's the big lesson here for corporate leaders from your perspective as a leader in corporate social responsibility yourself?
Yeah, I have always believed the reason that I went into this field of corporate social responsibility is because that I believe that corporations have some of the most valuable resources, both human and financial, to help solve some of community's most intractable problems. What I have learned in this field is it goes far beyond philanthropy. When you look at issues of racial wealth gaps, social injustice, they will not be solved by grants alone in one grant cycle. So it's really about bringing everyone in your organization, 73,000 US bankers together to say, what is it that I can do every single day to make people's lives better and to improve the planet? And right now, when it comes to issues of race, it takes a lot of courage. I'm a woman of color. I have to stand in a lot of rooms with a lot of white men and talk about my lived experience. So the biggest advice I would say is be courageous, and then think about how you can use your corporation as a force for good.
Ben, what about you? So Ben, so wonderful input from Reba and as a banking leader. And then on the other extreme, we've got cybersecurity, and you are really at the forefront, Ben, of that whole space there where we need more women and diversity. What's kind of one or two of your big takeaways or any other inputs that you have for folks?
Yeah, some of my big takeaways from the survey was, and I mentioned earlier, this sort of what I view as a disconnect of Gen Zers and women within that segment to be leaders, to be entrepreneurs, but then that drop in desire to be leaders at organization. And so for me, it's an opportunity, and as well as for other corporations, to really educate Gen Zers that you absolutely can be an entrepreneur. Right? I've worked for 2 Fortune 500s. I've worked for 2 midsize. I've worked for 2 startups. I feel like I've been an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is not a title, it's an activity, right? So opportunity for us to really help Gen Zers realize that you could be an entrepreneur within a very large company, which can give you global scale, can give you maximum impact. To Reba's point, can give you international opportunities. And so that was one of the more surprising things. The other one is also around salary expectation, right? We talked about expanding STEM to include entrepreneurship, right? If you're going to a company that's STEM based, right, there's an opportunity for Gen Zers to actually accelerate some of those salary expectations, even though that's not necessarily the most important point.
Really good input. Ben, a couple things that we're hearing from companies too is, folks, when they're hiring young people today, employers are saying, show me something that you've done. So they're looking for that ability to execute like Neha has done. And I think large companies now, it seems, really understand that they have to be innovating because it's like live or die, right? But Neha, over to you, like what's most surprising to you?
I think it's most surprising that Gen Z does want to actually start their own company, and they do want to make a change in society and, tackle social issues and innovate, but they don't see themselves as leaders. I think that's interesting because the desire is there, but it's just difficult to get there because, I think we've all heard that thing that public speaking is the #1 fear. And I think that's really interesting. Because a lot of us have the desire to make a change in society, to innovate, to do all these amazing things, to tackle problems that we see in the world, but we don't have the skill set to actually do those things. A lot of us, and especially Gen Z, I know when we're doing speeches in school, everybody's always scared and nervous to do public speaking. So I think really it's about channelizing those skill sets and actually enabling Gen Z and enabling the young generation to actually achieve those goals.
Neha, you should share a little bit too, because you did our program, which was live online during the pandemic. And there's been a lot of stories about the impact on students who are not in the classroom. And that's a little bit of a different kind of learning than you did. But talk about your experience of live online. And to just put that into perspective for folks, you went through a 10-week sort of mini MBA from idea to business plan. But how was that experience for you?
For me, I think this experience was actually even better than an in-person experience because I got to interact with girls across the country, not even just from my state. And I've been interacting with people globally, and it's really an eye-opening experience because you have so many more perspectives. And doing it online, there are so many different platforms that you can actually explore, and it's a totally open sphere. Like there's so many more possibilities with live online, and I think having the opportunity to interact with my mentor and my coach and talking to girls from across the country, it's been really, really helpful in actually developing that business plan.
And Ben and Reba, feel free to chime in. But one of the things you said too, Neha, about wanting those skills to do things, it's interesting because one of your colleagues, Jody, went through it, said that she, Gen Z, her generation, like they have the tools more at their disposal. They need the pathway. But I'm also curious about confidence because we still see that as an issue in young women. Do your peers at school talk about confidence? And do you feel like you've kind of overcome some of that maybe?
I think, yeah, confidence is definitely a hot topic around Gen Z. And part of it has to do with body image, like you said in the study, but it's more of an internal thing that you have to be comfortable with yourself. And doing things like public speaking, being part of Girls with Impact and being part of programs like that help you come out of your shell a little bit more and see yourself in a light of leadership and a light in positions of power where you actually deserve to have a voice at the table because you know that your voice matters. Like you're saying something that actually matters. So it's interesting to see really confidence building just stems from exposure, and the exposure is Girls with Impact. Exposure is speaking at your local community about an issue that you care about. Exposure is pursuing your passions without being hindered by things that maybe society would say to you or things that you're traditionally thinking of.
So Jen, can I jump in on this one? I'm sitting here like applauding Neha A couple of things that come to mind for me. One, on confidence. You know, I have been on a journey around confidence. I'm 50 years old and I finally feel confident and comfortable in my own skin. And I mentor a lot of young women, especially women of color, because I want them to get there so much sooner than I did. And one of the things we talk a lot about is confidence that comes from competence. There's this intense connection between those two things. So when I sit in the boardroom at US Bank and they are talking about EBIT, I am not the one who they're going to turn to and say, Reba, what do you think about incremental sources of revenue in our lending business? Like, that's not my role. But when there's anything about the community that comes up in the boardroom, I am the first one to speak. And people look at me and they go, oh, community, that's something Reba knows something about. Issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm usually have a seat at the table. So think about something where you're competent. And I think what you're saying, Neha, is what Gen Z is very competent at is being Gen Z, is knowing yourselves. And all of us in corporate America need to hear and want to hear your voices. The other thing I'll just add on that question of leadership, you know what I find fascinating about that, Jen, and maybe this is something we can look into in our next report, is how do you define leadership? You know, I think there's a traditional definition of leadership that looks like you're the person in the room that's sitting at the head of the table. You have people direct reporting to you. But I would argue within this world of entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, there's a very different definition of leadership that we need to potentially create so that the next generation can see how you can be a leader without being the loudest person in the room. You can be a leader by bringing something you've created to the table and putting it on the table or talking about it. So I think it's interesting to think about, how do we define a leader and how does that need to change for this generation?
Yeah, let me add on to that. I think corporations have to do a better job around confidence and life skills. You know, at ForcePoint, we have a major effort around inclusion and diversity. Obviously, given what's going on right now, it's an important point. We've had some very good, you know, very emotional conversations, and a lot of the employees have expressed, when they talk about inclusion, I want an environment at work where I can be myself, be authentic, be comfortable in my skin. Back to the confidence thing. And so, yes, classic classes around problem solving and how you present yourself and how you talk. There's classic ways of doing that. But corporations also have to realize, I think to your point, there's many different types of leadership. It starts with making people feel included and being inclusive and feeling comfortable, right? And good things spring from that. So I think that's something that, you know, a lot of corporations do a lot better job with regards to creating that type of environment.
Really great input. Thank you so much. Any other questions from anybody? Any other final comments before we sign off here? I know we're over a little bit. We've gotten great input from our participants from around the country. Thank you, Reba, so much from US Bank, and Ben from ForcePoint. It's awesome to have your support. And Neha, of course, who, you know, we all can't wait to see what you do, but please join us in creating more Nehas to follow. That's what this is all about, particularly right now. There's no reason that this has to be a lost year for folks. So thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day and be well.